Welcome to another deep dive. This time we're tackling life after capitalism. And I have to say, the title alone really grabbed my attention. We're going to be exploring some really interesting ideas about economics and innovation, stuff that might just challenge some of the assumptions we have about capitalism.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
George Gilder, the author of the book we're diving into, he's not exactly saying that capitalism is going to collapse or anything like that,
Right.
but he is suggesting a pretty significant shift in how we think about things like wealth and growth.
Okay.
It's less about predicting some kind of economic doomsday and more about opening up to a new way of looking at the world, and one where knowledge plays a really central role.
Knowledge. I like that knowledge being
Yeah.
central. So Gilder starts off by saying that a lot of those traditional capitalist theories, the stuff you learn in Econ 101,
Right.
may not really reflect what's actually going on in the world today. He calls this new phase, get this, emergency socialism, kind of a provocative term.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely gets your attention. And what's interesting is that he links this shift to something that happened back in 1971
Okay.
when the U.S. abandoned the gold standard.
Yeah.
It's like that move just kind of set us adrift
Yeah.
in this world of constantly fluctuating currencies. And all of a sudden, governments had a lot more power to try and control things, to
Yeah.
steer the economy in certain directions. I mean,
Yeah.
think about all the regulations and interventions we see nowadays.
Right.
Does that really look like the free market capitalism we're always talking about?
I guess not really.
Yeah.
So if we're in this new phase of, emergency socialism, how does Gilder even define wealth? I mean, it sounds like he's moving away from just focusing on physical stuff.
He is. His main argument is that wealth is fundamentally about knowledge.
Okay.
He wants us to move beyond that old way of thinking where we're obsessed with tangible assets and see those as the only real measure of wealth.
Okay.
He gives a really good example with oil. For centuries, oil was basically just this gooey mess underground,
Right.
pretty much worthless.
Until
Until humans developed the knowledge to get it out of the ground, refine it, and actually use it for something.
So it's not just about having the oil, it's about what we know how to do with it.
Exactly. The knowledge surrounding it is what makes it valuable.
Okay.
And you can see the same thing happening with the whole silicon economy. I mean, silicon, it's basically just sand, right?
Yeah.
Abundant and in its raw form,
Yeah.
worth practically nothing.
Yeah.
But the minute we embed knowledge into it, through all the design and engineering that goes into making microchips well, then it becomes incredibly valuable.
Yeah, I see that. So wealth is knowledge. But how does that actually play out in our everyday lives? How does knowledge show up in the regular transactions we make?
Well, think about it this way. Every time you go to work, you're basically participating in a knowledge exchange.
Okay.
You're using your skills, your experiences, your know-how, all of that to either provide a service or create a product.
Right.
And your employer is paying you for that knowledge. They're recognizing that what you bring to the table has value for their business.
So I'm getting paid for what I know. It's not just about punching the clock. It's about contributing my knowledge to the economy as a whole, which actually makes me think about the whole idea of scarcity. Is that really the driving force behind economics as we've been taught? If wealth is knowledge and knowledge keeps growing, could we actually be moving towards a world of abundance?
That is a really important question that Gilder digs into.
Yeah.
He argues that maybe, just maybe, our focus on scarcity is a bit outdated, especially now when we're in this knowledge-driven age.
Okay.
He introduces this pretty interesting concept called time prices. And he says this is a more accurate way to measure economic progress. So instead of just looking at the price tag on something, the sticker price,
Right.
he wants us to think about how much time we actually have to work to earn enough to buy something.
Time prices. Okay, I'm listening.
So a classic example he uses is the Thanksgiving dinner. He argues that the time price of a Thanksgiving dinner has actually gone down over time,
Okay.
meaning that people today need to work fewer hours to be able to afford that same feast than they did, say, 50 years ago.
So even if the prices themselves might seem higher on the surface, our buying power, when measured in time, has actually gone up.
Exactly. And that points to a potential abundance that we often miss when we just look at traditional economic numbers. We're not just talking about having more stuff.
Right.
It's about having more access to the things that matter to us. More freedom to pursue our goals and interests, because we're not spending all our time just trying to make ends meet.
Right.
And what's driving this shift? You guessed it, knowledge.
Okay, I'm with you. So if wealth is knowledge, what exactly is growth in this new way of thinking? Is it just about, cramming our heads with more facts and figures?
It's got to be more than that. Gilder says that growth is all about learning. It's that continuous process of accumulating and refining knowledge, and that's the real engine of economic progress.
Okay.
Think about smartphones, how much they've changed in just the last 10 years.
Oh, yeah.
They've gotten so much more powerful,
Right.
more affordable.
Yeah.
And that's directly because of this learning curve, not just for the engineers and designers, but for the whole industry.
So it's like the whole industry is on this massive learning journey together.
Right.
Constantly innovating, getting better.
Exactly.
And isn't Moore's law, the whole idea that computing power doubles every couple of years, isn't that kind of a testament to that whole learning process?
Absolutely. Moore's law isn't some mystical law of physics. It's a reflection of how clever humans can be, how we're able to learn and innovate at an incredible pace. And that brings us to another really important point Gilder makes, which is that money is essentially time.
Wait, hold on a second. Money is time. What does that even mean?
It means that, at its core, money represents the time that someone has invested in creating something valuable. It's not just about hoarding a bunch of paper or digital tokens. It's about recognizing that money embodies effort, skill, time, all those things that go into making something that has value.
Okay, so it's like, it's not just about the money itself, it's about what that money represents, the time and effort behind it.
Exactly.
And
And that raises a big question. What happens when governments or central banks just create money out of thin air? Money that's not connected to any actual productivity. Gilder argues that that just distorts the whole measure of value.
Right.
That leads to inflation.
Yeah.
It undermines real economic growth. It's almost like trying to create a counterfeit version of time, which never really works out well, does it?
Yeah, like printing fake time. I can see how that would mess things up. But Gilder doesn't stop there. He brings in information theory, which seems like a pretty wild connection.
It is, but it's a brilliant one. He connects it to the work of Claude Shannon, who's considered the father of information theory.
Okay.
And he emphasizes that information in its purest form is actually defined by surprise, not order.
Hold on, surprise. I thought information was all about clarity, about reducing uncertainty.
That's what we usually think.
Yeah.
But what Shannon showed was that the signals that carry the most information are the ones that are unexpected, the ones that challenge what we already know.
Okay.
And Gilder uses this really vivid story to illustrate this point.
Okay.
It's about a Bugatti Veyron, one of the priciest cars out there,
Right.
getting totally wrecked in a crash. Now, even though the wreckage still has all those same materials, the titanium, the carbon fiber, everything,
Right.
all of it,
Right.
the value's gone.
Yeah.
Poof.
Right, because the information, like how all those materials were arranged, that's gone.
Exactly. The specific arrangement of those atoms that made that car so special, so valuable, that's what got destroyed.
Okay, so it's not just about the stuff itself, but the knowledge embedded in how it's all put together?
Precisely. And this has huge implications for how we think about wealth creation, innovation, all of it. It's not just about having the right ingredients.
Yeah.
It's about knowing the recipe and knowing how to combine those ingredients in a way that makes something unique and valuable.
Okay, so we've gone from oil to silicon to Thanksgiving dinners to wrecked Bugattis. And somehow it all ties back to knowledge being the real source of wealth. But how does this play out in the business world, in finance?
Well, that's where Gilder's critique of traditional economics really comes into play. He says that mainstream economics is kind of trapped in what he calls a materialist superstition, this belief that we're limited by the amount of physical stuff we have.
Okay.
He sees human creativity, innovation, and of course knowledge as the real sources of abundance.
Okay.
He's saying that we actually have the potential to create far more than we could ever consume. And he doesn't just say this. He backs it up with some really interesting examples.
Let's get to those examples. I remember one that really caught my eye was about graphene.
Graphene, yeah. It's this amazing material, incredibly strong, incredibly conductive,
Right.
has the potential to revolutionize a ton of industries. Electronics, energy storage, all kinds of things.
Right. And here's the kicker. Graphene can be made from waste materials. We're talking about turning trash into something more valuable than gold.
It's like alchemy, turning lead into gold.
Yeah.
Or in this case, plastic bottles into graphene.
Yeah, exactly. And Gilder uses this as a perfect example of how knowledge can overcome what we think of as scarcity. It's not that we're running out of resources, it's that we need to figure out how to use the resources we already have in smarter, more innovative ways.
So it's shifting from a mindset of scarcity to a mindset of abundance, all driven by knowledge and ingenuity. What other examples does he use?
Well, he talks about containerization, which totally changed how global trade works
Yeah.
by standardizing shipping containers.
Right.
It seems so simple, but it had a huge impact because it just removed a lot of the friction, the inefficiencies that were slowing things down.
It's a good reminder that innovation doesn't always have to be about fancy gadgets. Sometimes it's about finding a really elegant solution to a problem that's been around forever. Exactly. And Gilder uses containerization as this contrast to the whole idea of just trying to manage scarcity.
Yeah.
He wants us to focus on the limitless possibilities of human creativity and innovation.
Okay.
And that leads him to his, well, let's call it a spirited critique of the modern financial system.
Yeah, he doesn't hold back when it comes to Wall Street. He basically says that modern finance is too focused on speculation, on these complicated financial instruments,
Right.
and not enough on investing in things that are actually productive, that create real value.
He calls it a hypertrophy of finance.
Mhm.
Like it's gotten way too big.
Yeah.
And it's crowding out real innovation and value creation.
So instead of money being a tool to build a better future, it's become like this game detached from the real economy.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
And he traces this back to, you guessed it, 1971, when the U.S. went off the gold standard.
Right.
That was the beginning of the fiat currency era.
Where money isn't tied to anything tangible anymore.
Right. It's just backed by the promise of the government that issued it.
Which gives them a lot of power to manipulate its value.
Yeah, a lot of power. And Gilder argues that this has led to a system where playing around with money is often more profitable than actually investing in things that create real value.
Right.
And that short-term thinking, chasing quick profits, trumps the long-term goal of building a society that's prosperous and sustainable.
It's like we've lost sight of the bigger picture.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
He points out that those massive government bailouts during the 2008 financial crisis and the pandemic, those are prime examples. Trillions of dollars created out of thin air, and that can have some pretty serious consequences.
Like what?
Like inflation.
Yeah.
Can distort the market. It creates this situation where reckless behavior gets rewarded.
It's like trying to put out a fire with gasoline.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Gilder sees all this reliance on government intervention to fix economic problems as a really slippery slope. He thinks it can stifle innovation, make us less productive, and ultimately it chips away at individual liberty.
So it's about remembering what money is really for. It should be a measure of value creation, not just a tool for political maneuvering. And Gilder contrasts this with his vision of a decentralized financial system, something based on blockchain technology,
Right.
where transactions are transparent, secure, and not so easily influenced by governments.
He believes that kind of system could really empower individuals, encourage innovation, and lead to a more stable and fair financial future.
But we talked about this earlier, he's not a Bitcoin fanatic, right? He
Yeah.
recognizes that it has limitations.
Right. He sees that fixed supply cap as a problem.
Yeah.
He thinks we need a digital currency that can handle scarcity, but can also grow as knowledge and wealth expand.
Yeah.
Something that reflects the dynamism of an economy that's driven by knowledge.
A digital currency that embodies those principles. Wealth is knowledge, money is time. That's a fascinating concept, and it ties in with his whole vision for Web 3.0, this decentralized internet idea.
Exactly. He sees Web 3.0 as a potential answer to all the problems we see with the current internet. Censorship, surveillance, data breaches.
Right.
He envisions a future where individuals have way more control over their own data, where power is spread out more evenly, and where innovation can thrive without governments always trying to control things.
It's a pretty radical shift from the model we have now, where a handful of giant tech companies have so much influence over how we communicate and interact online.
He even talks about getting rid of IP addresses, which are controlled by governments, and replacing them with a whole new system of unique identifiers, something that would be much more secure and harder to manipulate.
So it's about building a digital world that's more open, more secure, and fairer for everyone. And it all comes back to that deep connection to information theory and how it challenges the way we've traditionally thought about economics.
He keeps coming back to that definition of information from Claude Shannon, unexpected bits, and stressing that the most valuable information often comes as a surprise. It challenges our assumptions. It pushes us in new directions.
Yeah.
And then he even throws in Gödel's incompleteness theorem, which, if you remember, demonstrates that even our most advanced logical systems can't capture all truth.
Right.
There will always be truths that lie outside the system, and that's where real innovation happens.
So we can't predict the future perfectly. There's always that element of surprise, that potential for new discoveries that shake things up. And that has huge implications for economics. It means we can't just rely on those old, predictable models. We need to be open to the unknown, to the unexpected.
Exactly. And that's where entrepreneurs come in. Gilder sees them as the essential players in this knowledge-driven economy. They're the ones who embrace uncertainty, who are willing to explore the unknown, who are driven by that desire to discover and create something new and valuable.
So we need to create a space where that kind of entrepreneurship can thrive.
Right. Where taking risks is encouraged, and where pursuing those surprises, those things that challenge what we think we know, is seen as the engine of economic growth.
So it's about nurturing a culture that's all about experimentation, about questioning the status quo, about welcoming the unexpected. But Gilder also cautions against what he calls emergency socialism, this tendency for governments to keep stepping in and trying to control the economy.
Yeah, he argues that too much intervention can have all kinds of unintended consequences. It can create a culture where people become too dependent, and it can chip away at individual liberty.
Okay.
He uses a really interesting example from Margaret Mead's book, Male and Female. It's about a Polynesian tribe that had forgotten how to build canoes,
Wow.
which had been crucial to their survival, and they ended up stranded on this tiny island facing starvation.
That's a pretty stark reminder that even essential knowledge can be lost if we get too complacent, if we just rely on others to do all the thinking and creating for us.
And Gilder connects this story to where we are today, suggesting that maybe we're forgetting some of the core principles that are essential for a prosperous and thriving society. Principles like sound money, limited government, and celebrating human creativity.
Okay.
He sees all of those as being eroded in this era of emergency socialism, where government intervention has become so pervasive.
So it's a call to remember what truly drives progress.
Yeah.
To reclaim those principles that allow societies to flourish.
Right.
And to recognize that we all have a role to play in shaping the future.
Absolutely.
Not just for ourselves, but for the generations that come after us.
And that leads us to the heart of what life after capitalism is all about. It's not some preordained dystopia, some inevitable decline. It's a path, a potential path towards a world of abundance, of human flourishing. But it hinges on us embracing those principles of knowledge, learning, and pursuing what he calls informative entropy.
It's a powerful vision, an optimistic one, but it's also a challenge.
It is a challenge.
A challenge to think differently about economics, about how we create value, about the very nature of progress. And it's a challenge to each of us to actively participate in this knowledge-driven world,
Absolutely.
to invest in our own learning,
Yeah.
and to contribute to the growth of knowledge in the world. But we're going to dig deeper into that challenge in the next part of our deep dive.
Looking forward to it. One of the things that really stuck with me from Gilder's book is how he uses like actual data to back up his whole argument about abundance.
Yeah,
He doesn't just say, hey, trust me, everything's going to be awesome. He really digs into the numbers,
right.
shows how, even with all the doom and gloom we hear in the news, we're actually living in a time where there's more abundance than ever before.
Yeah, that was refreshing to see someone actually backing up their claims with data.
Yeah.
And he spends a lot of time talking about those time prices we discussed.
Right?
How they've been decreasing for a bunch of different goods and services. It's like he's saying, hey, yeah, things might look expensive when you just glance at the price tag.
Yeah.
But when you consider how much people are earning, the reality is that we can afford more with less work than ever before.
Absolutely. And he brings up the work of these economists, Gail Pooley and Marian Topy, who've created this really interesting way to measure abundance
Okay.
using those time prices.
Right.
They basically compare how long it takes someone to earn enough to buy a certain amount of something at two different points in time.
Right.
And the ratio of those time prices tells you how much easier or harder it is to get that item.
Okay, so it's not just about the price itself, it's about how many hours you have to work to afford it.
Right.
Got it. So what did Pooley and Tupy find when they applied this framework to, like, basic everyday stuff?
Well, they looked at 50 essential commodities, things like food, energy, materials, metals, all the basics.
Right.
And they tracked their time prices over a 40-year period, from 1980 to 2020. And get this, they found that the average time price for those commodities had dropped by over 75%.
Wow, that's a huge decrease.
Yeah. So even though we hear all this talk about inflation and scarcity, people can actually get more of these essential goods with less work than they could 40 years ago.
That's a pretty amazing finding.
It is, and that was a global average too, so it's not just limited to one specific country or region. It's a trend we're seeing pretty much everywhere. And what's even more interesting is that not a single one of those commodities in their study had actually become less abundant over that 40-year period.
So the whole scarcity narrative, it's really taking a hit here.
Yeah.
Even those resources that we think of as non-renewable seem to be defying this idea that we're just using everything up.
Right, and Gilder brings up the work of Julian Simon,
Oh, yeah.
who famously argued that the more we use resources, the more we actually find.
Right, because we get better at finding them, extracting them, all that.
Exactly, and he backs that up with data from the U.S. Geological Survey. They track prices on all kinds of minerals and metals.
Yep.
And over a period of 111 years, from 1904 to 2015, they found that every single one of the 43 minerals and metals they looked at had actually become more abundant.
So as we use these resources, we also figure out ways to get them out of the ground more efficiently. We discover new deposits, we find substitutes, we innovate. It's like this self-correcting system powered by human ingenuity.
I like that, a self-correcting system. That's a good way to put it. And Gilder also gets into some very specific examples of how time prices have decreased for everyday things. Stuff people can really relate to. Thanksgiving dinners, bicycles, pizza. He even talks about the cost of housing, which is always a hot topic.
Oh, yeah. Everyone's always complaining about how expensive it is to buy a house these days.
For good reason. Housing prices have skyrocketed in a lot of places. But Gilder points out that if you look at it from the time price perspective, things look a bit different.
So?
The number of hours you have to work to buy a house has actually gone down in many cases.
Because wages have gone up too, right?
Exactly. And because we've seen improvements in construction techniques, energy efficiency. The overall quality of housing has gotten better.
So even though the sticker price might be higher, you're getting more bang for your buck, so to speak.
Exactly. It's a good reminder that we need to look beyond just the raw numbers and consider the bigger picture.
Okay, that makes sense. He even addresses the whole idea that we need to drastically change our diets to be more sustainable.
Oh yeah, the whole eat less meat, eat more bugs thing.
Yeah, that's a popular one these days.
It is. But Gilder pushes back on that a bit by looking at the incredible abundance of corn. Corn is a major ingredient in animal feed.
Right.
And corn yields have gone way up over the last century.
So we can produce more food with the same amount of land.
Exactly. He celebrates those cornpreneurs who've made all that progress possible.
Cornpreneurs, I like that.
And he argues that we're not running out of food, we're actually getting better at producing it.
So it's about focusing on solutions, on innovation, not just giving in to these fear-driven narratives.
Right.
And this whole abundance mindset, it's not just about food and housing.
Yeah.
He even talks about how the time price of toys has gone down.
He does.
Yeah.
It's a fun example. But it shows how even things that aren't essential can become more abundant because of innovation.
So kids are getting more toys with less work. I'll take it.
Haha, right.
But it's not all about the physical world, right? He talks about information and digital goods, too.
Of course. He talks about virtual reality headsets, like the Oculus.
Yeah.
They've gotten so much more affordable and powerful in just a few years. It's a classic example of how technology can drive down costs and make things that were once super expensive accessible to more people.
Right, like that whole democratization of technology. And then there's information itself.
Yeah.
Like just the sheer abundance of information available to us now because of ebooks and online libraries and all that.
He mentions Project Gutenberg,
Right.
which has put together this huge library of free ebooks. It's amazing how technology can make knowledge so accessible.
It's like having the Library of Alexandria in your pocket.
Exactly. He also talks about how appliances have gotten cheaper, cars, even sugar.
Sugar. I'm curious about that one.
He points out that someone working in a factory today could buy hundreds of pounds of sugar with the same amount of work it would have taken to buy just 1 pound back in the 19th century.
Wow, that's wild. It really highlights how much progress we've made in making things affordable and accessible. But Gilder doesn't just focus on celebrating abundance, right? He also has some pretty strong critiques of our current economic system, especially when it comes to finance.
Right. He definitely has some concerns about Wall Street and the financial sector. He argues that it's become too powerful, too focused on speculation and these complicated financial instruments, and not enough on investing in companies and projects that are actually producing things, creating real value.
Yeah, the whole hypertrophy of finance idea.
Exactly. That overgrowth of financial activity that's crowding out real innovation and value creation.
And he traces this trend back to 1971, right? When the U.S. went off the gold standard.
Yeah, that was a pivotal moment.
Okay.
It marked the beginning of what we call the fiat currency era.
Where money isn't linked to anything tangible anymore.
Exactly. It's just backed by the faith we have in the government that issued it.
Which gives governments a lot of power to manipulate the value of money.
And that's one of Gilder's main concerns. He thinks this has created a system where it's often more profitable to manipulate money than to actually invest in something productive.
Okay.
And that chasing quick profits has become more important than building a stable and equitable economy for the long term.
Like, we've become too short-sighted.
Yeah, in a way. And he points to those massive government bailouts during the 2008 financial crisis and the pandemic as prime examples.
Okay.
Trillions of dollars created out of thin air,
Right.
which can lead to inflation. It distorts the market.
It's like we're trying to solve problems by just printing more money, but that often creates more problems down the road.
Exactly. And Gilder is very wary of this tendency to rely on government intervention to fix every economic problem.
Okay.
He thinks it can actually make things worse in the long run. It can stifle innovation,
Right.
make us less productive, and it can erode individual freedom.
So it's a reminder that money should be a tool for creating value, not for political manipulation. And Gilder contrasts this with his vision of a decentralized financial system, something built on blockchain technology,
Right.
where everything is transparent and secure, and governments can't interfere as easily.
He believes that kind of system could really shift the power back to individuals, encourage more innovation, and lead to a more stable and equitable financial future.
But as we discussed earlier, he's not a Bitcoin maximalist, right? He recognizes its limitations.
Right, that fixed supply cap is a problem.
Yeah.
He thinks we need a digital currency that can handle scarcity, but also has the ability to grow as knowledge and wealth expand, something that's more in tune with a dynamic economy driven by knowledge.
Okay.
So like a digital currency that embodies those principles. Wealth is knowledge. Money is time. It's a fascinating idea.
It is. And it ties into his whole vision for Web 3.0, that decentralized internet concept.
Exactly. He sees Web 3.0 as a potential solution to all those problems we have with the current internet.
Right.
The censorship, surveillance, data breaches, all of that.
Right.
He's talking about a future where people have more control over their own data,
Right.
where power is distributed more evenly across the network, and where innovation can happen without the government always trying to step in and control things.
It's a pretty radical departure from the model we have now, where these huge tech companies have so much power.
It is. He even talks about replacing IP addresses, which governments control, with a completely new system that's more secure and harder to manipulate.
It's a bold vision for a digital world that's more open, more secure, and fairer for everyone. And it all comes back to his understanding of information theory and how it challenges the assumptions that have shaped traditional economics.
It does. He keeps coming back to that definition of information as unexpected bits, stressing that the most valuable information often comes as a surprise. It shakes up what we think we know, and it forces us to see things in a new light.
Yeah.
And then he brings in Gödel's incompleteness theorem, which shows that even our most sophisticated systems can't encompass all truth.
Right.
There's always something more truth that lie beyond the system, and that's where real innovation comes from.
It's mind-blowing to think about, but it also has these huge implications for economics. It means we can't just rely on those old deterministic models, the ones that assume everything is predictable and stays in equilibrium.
Right.
We have to acknowledge that there's always going to be this element of surprise,
Yeah,
this potential for new discoveries that change everything.
exactly. And that's where entrepreneurs are so important. They're the ones who are comfortable with that uncertainty, with exploring the unknown. They're the ones who are driven to discover and create something new.
So we need to create an environment where that kind of entrepreneurship can flourish.
Absolutely. Where risk-taking is celebrated and where pursuing those surprises, those things that challenge what we think we know, is seen as the engine of economic growth.
So it's about nurturing a culture of experimentation, of challenging the status quo, and being open to the unexpected.
Yeah.
But at the same time, Gilder warns us about what he calls emergency socialism, that tendency for governments to try and control everything.
Right.
He argues that too much intervention can have all kinds of unintended consequences.
You can.
It can create a culture where people become too dependent, it can stifle innovation, and it can erode individual liberty.
He uses a really interesting example from Margaret Mead's book, Male and Female. It's about a Polynesian tribe that had forgotten how to build canoes,
Wow.
which used to be essential to their survival.
Right.
And they ended up stranded on this little island, facing starvation.
That's a pretty powerful reminder that even essential knowledge can be lost if we become complacent, if we just rely on other people to do all the thinking and creating for us.
It is a powerful reminder. And Gilder connects that story to where we are today, suggesting that maybe we're forgetting some of the basic principles that are essential for a thriving society. Things like sound money, limited government, and celebrating human creativity.
Okay.
He sees those as being eroded in this era of emergency socialism, where government intervention is everywhere.
So it's a call to remember what truly drives progress,
It is.
to reclaim those principles that allow societies to flourish,
Absolutely.
and to recognize that we all have a role to play in shaping the future, not just for ourselves, but for the generations that come after us.
Exactly. And that brings us to the core of what life after capitalism is all about. It's not some predetermined dystopia, some inevitable decline. It's a potential path, a path toward a world of abundance where humanity can truly flourish. But that path depends on whether we embrace knowledge, learning, and what he calls informative entropy.
It's a very optimistic vision. It's empowering, too.
Yeah.
But it also presents us with a challenge.
It does. A challenge to think differently about how we create value, about what progress really means.
And it challenges each of us to participate in this knowledge-driven world,
Right.
to invest in learning new things, and to contribute to the growth of knowledge in the world.
Absolutely.
But we'll delve deeper into that challenge in the last part of our deep dive. Okay, so we've really dug into a lot of Gilder's ideas in Life After Capitalism. This whole idea of knowledge as the ultimate source of wealth, the importance of learning and innovation, the potential for abundance, and the risks of what he calls emergency socialism. But where do we go from here? I mean, what does all this actually mean for our lives or the future?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, right?
Right.
Gilder isn't just laying out some theoretical economic framework.
Right.
He wants us to actually think differently about the world, about how we fit into it, how we shape the future.
And he wraps up the book with this really powerful question. If wealth is knowledge, what are we actually doing to invest in our own knowledge? And how are we contributing to the growth of knowledge in the world?
It's a call to action.
It is.
He's challenging each of us to be active participants in this knowledge-driven economy.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just sit back and absorb information.
Right.
We need to be creators, innovators, lifelong learners.
Exactly. He wants us to be curious, to question everything, to be open to new ideas, and to constantly be seeking out new knowledge.
Yeah.
And it's not just about, memorizing facts and figures. It's about developing a deep understanding of how those things connect to the real world, how they can be used to solve problems, to create something valuable.
So it's about making that connection between the theory and the actual doing, between the abstract ideas and the tangible things we create. It's about taking those moments of insight, those aha moments, and turning them into something real, something that benefits other people.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the big challenges in this life after capitalism era, making sure that knowledge doesn't get stuck in academia or research labs. It needs to get out there, be shared, and used to make a real difference.
So it's about democratizing access to knowledge.
Absolutely.
Breaking down those barriers between different fields of study, encouraging collaboration, creating a culture where people feel comfortable taking risks, experimenting. It's about giving individuals the power to be creators and innovators, not just passive consumers.
He makes the point that the most valuable knowledge often comes from unexpected places, those aha moments that disrupt what we think we know and push us in new directions.
Right.
It's about recognizing the incredible power of knowledge, how it can surprise us, challenge us, and ultimately lead us towards a future that's more abundant and fulfilling.
And that brings us back to that Polynesian tribe, the one that forgot how to build canoes.
Right.
They had the resources, but they lost that essential knowledge that had allowed them to survive. Gilder is warning us not to make that same mistake.
Yeah.
We need to be proactive in cultivating knowledge, those principles that underpin a free and thriving society.
Absolutely. He's reminding us that the future isn't set in stone. We have the power to shape it. But the path we choose will depend on the values we embrace and the knowledge we cultivate.
So life after capitalism, it's not necessarily some utopia or dystopia.
Right.
It's a crossroads.
Yeah.
And the way we go from here depends on the choices we make today.
Absolutely. That's a really powerful message, one that calls for both optimism and a sense of responsibility.
Hmm.
We have the potential to create something amazing, a world of abundance, creativity where everyone can flourish. But it's up to each of us to step up and make it happen.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up our deep dive into life after capitalism. Hopefully, this has given you some new insights into the forces at play in our world and the potential we all have to create a better future.
Absolutely. Remember, the future is not preordained. It's shaped by the choices we make right now. So
Mm.
go out there, embrace knowledge, and build the world you want to live in.
That's great advice. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. And until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible.